Okay, so yeah, loving the form factor here. This thing is putting out amazing performance. I've been able to run everything at 4K, and I know some people might not be into this style of case, but I do think it looks really good. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be putting together a really interesting, very powerful mini ITX gaming PC using the all-new Cooler Master NCORE 100 Max case. I've been really excited about doing a build with this case, and I've actually had it in my possession for about 2 months, but the release was kind of pushed back, so I had to wait a little while. But I think it's going to be well worth it because the new NCORE 100 Max is one of those mini ITX tower cases, so it's not a huge case. It's actually pretty small form factor once it's all put together, but it does include up to a 1000 watt power supply and an AIO cooling system. Again, for this build, we're going to go all AMD, and as we put it together, I will go over the parts used, but just keep in mind, we've got a powerful 16-core, 32-thread CPU, and the most powerful Radeon GPU on the market, the RX 7900 XTX. Believe it or not, the new NCORE 100 Max will support up to a 336mm GPU, and you can actually go up to 140mm in height with that GPU. So you could theoretically put an RTX 4090 in here if you want to. And the version of the case that I have actually comes included with an 850 watt SFX gold rated power supply. It is fully modular. And the way they set this case up is actually really interesting. We don't need any tools to get in here. We can pull this side panel right off. And taking a look internally, you can see that our GPU is going to sit over on this side, so they did need to include a riser. And since this comes with that pre-installed AIO and power supply, all of the cables are basically routed for us. It's actually super clean right out of the box. Now moving over to this side, we can see this is where our motherboard is going to sit, and it only supports a mini ITX board. But from what I've seen online so far, everything should fit in here really nicely. A lot of the cases we see on the market nowadays don't come with a pre-installed power supply and an AIO system. This one is a bit different because we've got a 120mm radiator up top, and it's 38mm thick. Now they do claim that you can do up to an Intel i9 or a Ryzen R9 CPU, and since I'm going with an R9 with 16 cores and 32 threads, I am a bit skeptical about this 120mm AIO. But the radiator here is thicker than a typical 120mm radiator, coming in at 38mm thick. And right underneath this, there's a custom PWM fan with a pressure blade design, which is specifically designed for these radiators. So it's going to blow air up through, and it will spin up a bit faster than others. This will go up to 2400 RPM, allowing it to get that air through that thicker radiator. And yeah, from what I'm seeing so far, it definitely looks a little smaller for the CPU I'm opting to use here, but we're going to give it a shot and see what happens. Now, when it comes to the other parts in the system, for the motherboard, I'm going with the MSI Mag B650i Edge Wi-Fi, and one of the big reasons I'm going with this is pricing. If you've tried to go mini ITX with the AM5 platform, you know that these boards can get quite expensive, but this one will work out really well. I've actually tested this with the 7700X a few times, never had any issues. Dual channel DDR5, and we've got a pretty beefy cooler over here on the VRM. Now, it is a passive cooler, but it worked out well with that 7700X, even with some major overclocking, so I'll go ahead and give this one a try. When it comes to storage, I went with the 2TB Aorus 7000 series PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD. And of course, we need to add some RAM to this system. Since it is AM5, we have to go DDR5. I went with 32 gigabytes of Kingston Fury at 6800 megahertz, so we've got a dual channel setup here. And like I mentioned, I did go with the 16-core, 32-thread Ryzen 7000 series CPU. It's the AMD Ryzen 9 7950X. It's the non-X3D variant. This was one of the first Ryzen 7000 series CPUs that I had. I've still got it. It wasn't being utilized, so I figured we'd go ahead and put this cooler and case to the test. Base clock of 4.5 gigahertz with a boost up to 5.7, and this is a great performer, single and multi-core. It'll push through anything, definitely a little overkill for gaming, but again, we're just going to go ahead and see what we can do with it. With this case, love the fact that we have that pre-installed power supply, 850 watt gold. We do get several different adapters, it's fully modular, and with the GPU I'm using, I do need 3 PCIe 8-pin connectors. We've got them here, comes included with the case itself. Plus, we've got this GPU riser right down here. To tell you the truth, definitely looks messy right now, but I think we can clean this up really nicely once we get everything installed. That mini ITX board does sit right down in here very nicely. We've got front-facing USB, 3.5mm audio jack, and USB Type-C. So now I need to get everything mounted in here. I'm also going to go ahead and install the cooler on this CPU. And once that's finished, it looks a little something like this. I actually think it went together really nicely, but I haven't installed the GPU on the other side yet, so I still have a few cables I need to plug into that modular power supply, but so far so good. It's actually been really easy to build in. Now it's time to install the GPU, and I wanted to go all AMD, so we went with the ASRock 7900 XTX. This is the Tai Chi variant. This case will support a 336mm in-length GPU, and we can do up to 140mm in height. This card will fit in here, but it's a really tight squeeze. I did need to do a little bit of maneuvering to get it in, but once it's installed, you can see it actually sits in here quite nicely. I think it goes together really well, and the cable management on this case has been awesome. I mean, it is top-notch the way they've got everything set up. Tons of mounting points, so we can use zip ties or whatever you want to use to get everything situated. And really, the last thing we need to do here is get the top cover on that radiator and the side panels installed. So let me go ahead and get all that done, and we'll get this thing booted up. Real quick, just wanted to give you a look. We've got that bronze edition, and yeah, I do think it looks really good. The GPU does have a little bit of RGB. This can be disabled from the card itself. There is an RGB switch on it. So if you're not into that, you can always turn it completely off, and that's probably what I'll do. Okay, so I've got everything installed and updated. Been doing a little bit of testing so far, and this thing is an absolute beast. As you can see, we've got that Ryzen 9 7950X, 32 gigs of DDR5 at 6800. And of course, we're going to be utilizing that AMD Radeon RX 7900 XTX with 24 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, I was really interested in this little cooler here to see what it was going to do with this high-end CPU. CPU-Z, run a stress test. You can see this jumps up to around 200 watts, and the temp really does go up pretty quickly here. Now that fan ramps up, it's not too loud. Of course, we could definitely hit thermal throttle with this if we were to max out all 16 cores and 32 threads for a long period of time. But while gaming, we're not going to be pulling this kind of wattage from that CPU. It actually stays a lot cooler than I thought it would be, around 72 degrees Celsius. And that might sound a bit high for somebody with a larger PC, 360mm AIO, but we're working with a small 120mm cooler here. And, putting this high-end 7950X on it is kind of crazy, but it is working. Now, the first thing I did once I got everything installed and updated was run some benchmarks. Here we have Geekbench 6 looking really good here with a single core of 2,681, multi-core 19,268. Single core looking great, and multi is outstanding given that we have those 32 threads to work with. Next up, we've got some GPU benchmarks using 3D Mark. With Firestrike, we scored a 53,450. I also ran the Port Royal benchmark. Now, these AMD GPUs aren't known for ray tracing, but we got a total score of 16,520. I mean, very respectable here. And the final benchmark we have is TimeSpy with a 25,960. This is definitely one of the most powerful all AMD PCs that I've been able to build and test so far, but we need to get into some real-world gaming to see what we can do with this thing. And we're just going to see how far we can push it right out of the gate with Starfield. 4K Ultra with FSR set to balance. Now that's really the way we need to run this, even on the 7900 XTX. But overall, I'm actually seeing some pretty decent performance, especially given that we're in the city. If you've played this game on any GPU, you know that planet exploration and indoor situations do really well on most GPUs out there, but as soon as you get to a city, it can fall on its face even with the highest end GPU on the market. This is looking pretty decent. Wish we didn't need FSR, but we're actually getting an average of 77 FPS now. I always like to throw at least one fighting game in, so we've got Mortal Kombat 1 maxed out at 4K, and going into this I knew we'd have some pretty decent performance. With this game here, our CPU is only pulling around 85 to 86 watts, and our GPU isn't even halfway maxed out, coming in around 170 watts. I see this GPU regularly pull a little over 400 watts, with most newer AAA games running at 4K. I did run the built-in benchmark for Shadow of the Tomb Raider. 4K, very high settings, no resolution scale, so we didn't need to scale it down manually, we didn't need to enable FSR or Fidelity CAS, and we got an average of 129 FPS. But I'll tell you, at the end of this, I was actually expecting to see a little more out of this. The newer Spider-Man games for PC do really well on these Radeon GPUs, especially the higher end ones. And with the 7900 XTX, we can max this out at 4K, no problem at all. If you added a little bit of FSR, we could get much more out of it, but we're over 100 FPS here at 4K very high, and I think it's more than playable on this setup.
Hey, there's a break-in happening near you.
And the final game I wanted to get into was one of my favorites, Forza Horizon 5, 4K Extreme Settings. And from the Extreme Settings, you can actually enable a little more, going up to what I like to call Ultra Extreme, because there are some settings that are kind of set at Ultra. You can take up a little more, even at that preset. But with this, at 4K, we got an average of 152 FPS. Okay, so in the end, with the specs we have here, yeah, we can run any AAA game at 4K. As you saw with Starfield, we did need to add a little bit of FSR, so we had some resolution scale going there. But with everything else I tested, you really didn't need to enable it unless you wanted just a little bit more, or a lot more going to FSR performance. Personally, I love the form factor. It doesn't take up that much space because we need to kind of work vertically with this. We've got tons of room in here. As you saw, we were able to fit this ASRock 7900 XTX, no problem. And you could do an RTX 4090 in here if you wanted. It's a super clean build. The way they've got cable management is awesome. We do get that 850 watt power supply, and there's rumor that there's a 1000 watt version out there. I personally haven't seen it. Plus, we've got that pre-installed all-in-one cooling system, which does handle this Ryzen 9 7950X a lot better than I thought it would. I figured we'd be at thermal throttle all day long, but while gaming, our temps were only around 72 to 73 degrees Celsius, which isn't bad at all given the form factor. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the new Cooler Master NCORE 100 Max, and if you're interested in learning a little more, I'll leave links in the description. Plus, I'm going to leave links for everything I used in this build in case you want to put something like this together. But again, this is a bit overkill. I would probably just go with like a 7800 X3D, maybe even a lower end Radeon GPU or something like an RTX 4070. You're still going to see great performance out of it. But I wanted to go all AMD right now because I will be doing a video with SteamOS installed on this, so stay tuned to the channel. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you've got any questions, let me know down below. And like always, thanks for watching.